This is the podcast of ENCATC, the European Network on Cultural Management and Policy. In this series, we interview extraordinary professionals from the cultural management and policy community. Join us to hear their stories, the secrets of their success, and their advice for creating innovation by inspiring new policies and practices in the cultural, education, and research sector.
Welcome to the ENCATC podcast channel, a space where we meet to talk and reflect about cultural management and policy education and practice. My name is Gianelia Cogliandro Beyens, and today I'd like to invite you to listen to this special podcast series devoted to the ENCATC Congress, a major event organized in Helsinki from the 11th to the 13th of October 2023. At this occasion, our global community converged to explore the theme of artificial intelligence, a theme that is not just relevant but also profoundly transformative for the culture and creative sectors. In these 5 episodes recorded at the occasion of our Congress, expect to hear the voice of leading experts and truly visionary people who are not just embracing the future, they are all actively shaping it through their practice and policies. They will talk about the impact of artificial intelligence on artistic expression, the evolution of policy and cultural institutions in the digital age, the change to be done in terms of leadership in an artificial intelligence context, and much more. I truly hope that this podcast will give you a new perspective and ideas to start introducing the artificial intelligence in your cultural organization, in your teaching practice, or in the shaping of new policies for the cultural sector. Thank you for listening.
What I'd like to do now is to present next speaker. Dr. Oonagh Murphy is a senior lecturer in digital culture and society at Goldsmiths, University of London. As an arts manager, writer, and lecturer, her research has taken her around the world to explore international best practice on the scalability of emerging technologies for cultural organizations. Oonagh is the principal investigator and co-founder of the Museums and AI Network, which is funded through the AHRC network grant in the UK. The network was established in 2019 with the Pratt Institute, New York, National Gallery, London, and the Metropolitan Museum of Art, New York. Oonagh is a regular contributor to museum sector forums on digital culture, innovation, and management, and has been invited to speak at leading cultural centres in the UK, Europe, and the US, including in the UK, the Barbican Centre, the V&A, the National Theatre, and in Vienna, the Belvedere New Museum. So I'd like to turn over to Oonagh.
Good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining. I'm really excited to be presenting this keynote this morning. In thinking about what area of my work I should focus on, I decided I should focus on being somewhat provocative. So today, I'm really hoping to get you to think some more about the ethical issues that sit at this intersection of creativity and technology. My research and my work sits in this middle space between theory and practice. I work with cultural organisations, primarily museums and visual cultural organisations, to influence policy and practice. But I'm also really interested in how, as an academic, I can bring in those skills to the classroom. And I think this idea of cultural praxis, where academia influences culture and culture influences academia, is really important. And hopefully that's what you'll see today in the work that I'm going to be sharing with you, this valuable intersection that sits between these two disciplines. So the images on the screen currently are probably quite familiar to you, or headlines similar to this. Whether it's AI stealing the intellectual property of artists, or computer vision technology being used to police already over-policed marginalised communities, for example, at the Notting Hill Carnival in London. We also see examples of AI being promised as a mechanism to improve security at events. We're also starting to see the use of artificial intelligence to help us make strategic decisions, for example, naming exhibitions to make them more discoverable, or helping us to decide how many staff that we need to work on any given day based on predicted ticket sales. Whilst most of these headlines are either utopian or dystopian, the reality of AI from a cultural perspective is more nuanced and often sits somewhere between utopia and dystopia. In 2019, I established the Museums and AI Network. And the aim of this network was really to develop the conversation around AI ethics in museums. But it was also to unpick the headlines around utopian and dystopian promises of artificial intelligence, both within museums as public institutions and also wider society. Through this network, we created an action research project that brought academics and museum professionals with policymakers together in both London and New York. When exploring possible outcomes for the working group, we looked at ethics frameworks and codes of conduct. But through our working group, we established that whilst ethics framework and codes of conduct can be useful documents, they seldom serve as daily guidance. And instead, workflow models, which come from technology sector, are more prevalent and more useful when it comes to thinking about developing technology in a cultural context. As a result, and working with over 50 professionals, we iteratively developed Artificial Intelligence Toolkit. The toolkit sought to bring together a series of case studies, a glossary, but also crucially, 3 separate worksheets. Each worksheet is designed to lead a self-facilitated workshop format. The worksheets or workshop formats encourage the embedding of ethical principles at all stages of the life cycle in developing an AI project. These toolkits and the workshop formats that are associated with them have been used internationally in many different contexts. Only this week, on Monday, I was working with a university in Milan, examining the different ways artificial intelligence has been used in an Italian context. And next week, I'll travel to Seoul in South Korea to present these toolkits and facilitate the embedding of ethical principles in project development cycles. The international distinctions in the adoption of artificial intelligence is something that has been crucial for this work. This toolkit was originally published in English with case studies from the United Kingdom and the US. We were then approached and asked to develop these toolkits and translate them into Spanish and German. One area of practice I'm really interested in is, rather than simply replicating successful practices and policies, is looking at national and international distinctions of practice. So instead of direct translations, we worked with partners in these countries to translate the workshop formats and the ethical frameworks. But each international toolkit has distinct local case studies. And this feels really important from a decolonization perspective and moving away from the model of English and American exceptionalism, but instead to embedding multiple voices. Again, this year, we're working with Italian partners and will publish an Italian version. This will also feature Italian toolkits, which situates this emerging policy and practice within a national context. So what does this look like? One of the key aspects of this research when we began was mapping emerging uses of artificial intelligence. We created an open access spreadsheet, which I'll link at the end of this presentation, which outlines the name of the organization, the description of artificial intelligence technology that is being used, crucially also the data that is being used to input, and the date at which this project happened. This is quite useful when we start to map the emergence and development of artificial intelligence technology. We can say that artificial intelligence has been mainstream in the cultural sector for about the last 10 years. Although instances in the last 10 years have primarily focused on large national institutions with significant budgets and digital capacity in-house. So what does this look like in practice? I'm going to pick out a few examples of those projects that we mapped. Computer vision, essentially a mode of searching by pattern and recognition. The computer learns to see, or technically learns to recognize patterns. In this example from Cooper Hewitt Smithsonian Design Museum, we see dive into color. At the time this search function was developed, it was not possible to search the design collection by color unless the object had been catalogued with the metadata tag of the relevant colors. For a design museum, they want to be contemporarily relevant and accessible to their designers. Computer vision allows them to open their collection in a completely new way and to make it searchable by color. In this example from 2016, we see the mode of curatorial practice engaging with emerging artificial intelligence. The Tate IK Prize was awarded to Fabrica for their project entitled Recognition. On the left-hand side of your screen, you see a live image from a news feed. On the right hand, you see a matching with the Tate collection. This live stream was projected into the gallery of Tate Britain. For every live image or news image that was produced, the computer system, the AI system, searched the museum's collection to find a relevant match. The white text that you can see layered over outlines what the similarities are. This is an interesting and novel approach to thinking about contemporary relevance of a collection. In 2019-2020, the National Gallery in London developed a predictive analytics dashboard. It also developed a predictive analytics app, which was given to all staff, from front of house staff through to their director. This predictive analytics dashboard predicted footfall for any given day, focusing specifically on paid exhibition entry. The data points that it used to predict visitor footfall included the artist's popularity on Wikipedia, the art movement and period, marketing spend, day of the week, with plans to bring in further data points in future, including weather and live news reporting that relates to Trafalgar Square. The gallery sits beside a square that is commonly used for protests. This can be quite useful in a number of ways. It can allow the museum to better predict how busy they will be and therefore to staff accordingly. This can increase customer or visitor satisfaction. They won't have to queue as long to get into an exhibition because the relevant staff will be in place. But this technology can also be useful for naming an exhibition to help it to become more discoverable through search engines. It can also be useful to help to think about how long an exhibition should last for and how big the exhibition should be in physical space. You can probably see here already why strategic people within the organisation love these tools and curatorial staff absolutely hate them. So again, utopia, dystopia, when it comes to artificial intelligence, the nuance in the middle is quite often the reality of current practice. This is an interesting example of natural language processing. Here we see two digital educators, Ada and Grace, at the Museum of Science in Boston. They're explaining the process of how they've been created and how they work, and are able to answer and interact with visitors. They're able to do this through a process called natural language processing. They can speak to visitors, but they can also convert voice into written text. This is an interesting example of explainable artificial intelligence. So moving beyond some examples of artificial intelligence to the bigger questions around ethics and practice. Through my work with the Museums and AI Network, we categorized the two areas of emerging practice. The first was AI and operations or visitor data, and the second was art form and collections data. What's interesting is that the staff resource to answer both sets of questions are quite distinct, which means that there are conversations about artificial intelligence happening within collections department and curatorial departments, which are completely distinct to similar conversations that are happening in marketing and operations focused roles. But what underpins both sets of questions is the idea of the cultural organisation as a public institution, as a non-profit space. How does the current museum sector code of ethics and regulations cover this rapidly growing field? Explainable AI is becoming an increasingly important area of practice. And I think this framing from Elizabeth Merritt, the director of the American Alliance of Museums, is helpful here. In 2018, she said, anytime you talk about an emerging technology, museums have an important role to play, teaching the public about it. Artificial intelligence is going to be incredibly important in shaping the world we live in profound ways. We need to understand the technology and the issues it raises. Our response to this challenge was to frame it as critical technology discourse, a theoretical framework from which to examine how cultural organisations critically engage with technology, the language we use to explain and discuss these technologies, and through public programmes and contemporary collecting to develop the digital literacy of visitors. Some of you may be old enough to remember that computer science used to be taught in schools with the acronym garbage in, garbage out. The same remains true today. The data that we input, the algorithm that we use, combine together to create the outcome of artificial intelligence. If the data we input is garbage and the algorithm we use is garbage, then the output will also be garbage. The root of artificial intelligence is data. And sometimes when we look at these utopian, dystopian headlines, we forget the basics of this work. Good quality data. Which leads us to an interesting challenge of bias squared. My work primarily looks at visual arts organisations and museums. And these organisations, like many across the cultural sector, come with historical baggage. Much of that baggage comes from a long history of colonisation in a variety of different aspects. This creates a situation of bias squared, the historical institutional bias that we hold in our collections data, or the data we hold around our visitors, multiplied by the bias that is inherent within algorithmic systems. So we begin to see here some of the challenges of using these technologies. Again, the idea of the museum as a cultural institution is also a public institution becomes crucial to the contemporary relevance of them. In this example here, titled What the Machine Saw, was developed by John Stack at the Science Museum. It allows you to search the Science Museum's collection using a computer vision tool. And in doing so, we're able to gain a better understanding into how the computer sees. On the top right of the image, you can see a glass specimen bottle. It contains the skins of silkworms. It's very niche, it's very specific. The computer can identify a bag and a jar, but we're a very long way away from the computer being able to identify the skins of silkworms. The bottom right image is a piece of jewellery, and we can see from the image recognition, the computer is much better at seeing this object. This example is publicly searchable, but not published on the Science Museum's website, but instead was developed as an internal discovery tool. Harvard Art Museum has went a step further in creating the AI Harvard Art Museum Explorer. If you search for anything on the museum's online catalogue, it will provide a response alongside 6 different computer vision tools. This allows you then to see one image through the eyes of 6 different computers. What we see is that the 6 different computers see the image in different ways. They catalogue it in different ways. This is a really helpful way of explaining how computers see. This is useful when we're talking about facial recognition and policing, for example. So the benefits of cultural organisations in explainable AI exist much beyond the art form that they represent. Bias and errors are inherent in everything that we do. And acknowledging that those exist can mean that we can develop processes that allow us to respond and create better output data. I really like this novel example from the Metropolitan Museum of Art. In talking about why they have to engage with big tech and third-party suppliers, they exclaim, "We only have 600 cats, and typically you need tens of thousands of training records to properly train machine learning algorithms. So this is a problem. They don't have enough cats, and that means that they have to partner with big tech." So what do we know? Well, we know that algorithms can function to codify and legitimize existing patterns of unfairness in society. They work on the basis that past assumptions made by decision makers were correct, and that past decisions were good decisions. Algorithms, like their human creators, are always imperfect and will always exhibit bias. I would really support having this statement written on a notice board in every office, in every cultural organisation. I think it's really important that we remember this idea that algorithms, like their human creators, are always imperfect and always will exhibit bias. Quite often when it comes to thinking about cultural organisations, we like to think of us as experts in our own area. So moving to this idea of imperfection and bias as built into the way we work can be quite useful in producing better work in the future. Explainable AI and unboxing these technologies to empower visitors to better understand the impact of these technologies in their own lives is becoming increasingly important. I was commissioned by the Barbican Centre in London and the Smithsonian Cooper Hewitt Design Museum in New York to develop a series of public events. The aim of these events was to empower visitors to feel that they could contribute to a conversation around current uses of artificial intelligence across society, but also to feel confident in challenging the use of these technologies and responding to the information they gained by changing their behaviours of data usage. Both of these events were designed to be explorative. The event in London took the format of a long table, a long public table in a public area of the institution. Anyone could sit down, anyone could pick up the microphone, and anyone could join the conversation. In New York, we took the format of curator, computer, creator again. But we invited 3 different speakers to take on the role, to examine what does it mean to be a curator? What does it mean to be a computer? What is the computational process and how are humans embedded within it? And finally, to that of curator. How can creators or artists, cultural producers, help us to engage with these technologies in new ways? I want to give one in-depth example of an artist's work, because I think this allows us to start to see how artists can provide new ways of understanding these technologies. Much of the debate when it comes to artificial intelligence and visual artists, cultural producers, centres on this idea of intellectual property. Artificial intelligence will steal our ideas. And whilst that is an interesting and relevant line of discussion, today I want to encourage a slightly different way of thinking about artists and artificial intelligence. I want to encourage us to think about how artists can help to develop better uses of artificial intelligence, how artists can influence policy and public discourse about these technologies, how artists can empower us to have more engaged conversation with policymakers, politicians, and big tech companies, and how cultural organisations can provide an important platform for these conversations. So the work I want to introduce you today is the work of Trevor Paglin in an exhibition titled From Apple to Anomaly. In this image here, we can see a reproduction of Magritte's 1964 painting entitled This Is Not an Apple. The work by Magritte is a painting of an apple with the word signet and palm, "This is not an apple," painted across the top of the painting. Paglin has added an additional layer to the photographic reproduction of this painting and included the categories or tags that the machine vision training set ImageNet applied to the painting when it was analysed by its algorithm. If we walk through the process of seeing in this example, we can begin to understand where the tensions lie in the application of computer vision technologies or algorithmic ways of seeing. The machine sees an apple. On first look, the human eye sees an apple. The artist tells us it is not an apple. It's complicated. However, the human viewer can engage with this work as a surrealist provocation. The computer, or more specifically algorithm, struggles to see beyond the literal. It is an apple, nothing more, nothing less. Artistic ways of seeing can also help us to explain the impact of these technologies on wider society. I've just begun to work with the International Red Cross and Red Crescent Museum in Geneva on a year-long programme titled Digital Dilemmas. This year-long programme will bring together artists and humanitarian workers, policymakers and legislators in Geneva to examine the impact of digital technologies on the work that humanitarian workers do on the ground. In this image here, we can see the work of Marta Revuelta in a piece called The Logics of Droning. This drone is used to surveil visitors, to track them, to make judgments on who they are and identify who might be a risk. This work of art places policymakers and legislators in the footsteps of those in war zones who are being tracked and targeted by foreign agents or hundreds of miles away, thousands of miles away in different countries and sometimes different continents, deciding whether they live or die. We can have policy debates about artificial intelligence, about drones, about warfare. But whilst you're standing underneath a drone in the comfort and security of Geneva, the emotional resonance and impact of these technologies becomes prescient and changes the mindsets and ways that we engage and legislate for these technologies. So as I begin my conclusion, I'd argue that the case studies I've discussed today show that we are at this really critical junction in the use of AI technologies within the cultural sector. And cultural professionals are faced with a choice. We can blindly adopt what is possible and what is affordable from third-party vendors, or engage in a public, critical, yet constructive process of development that can support ethically robust technology development. This, I think, is a really helpful framing tool from Algorithm Watch. We see here two categories. The first, promoters of panic. They also define this as panic as a business model or AI panic as marketing. Companies that have created the problems are also offering to solve the problems of AI if we pay for them. On the right-hand side, we see a different group, the anti-panic operators. These fall into two areas, concerned experts and those focused on human rights. I argue that cultural organizations should sit within the context of concerned experts, alongside the likes of the Ada Lovelace Institute, Data and Society, and the Mozilla Foundation. We serve as a place for public discourse, as a forum for critical debate, and crucially, critical technology discourse. Cultural organizations provide a space to empower citizens to have public discourse and difficult conversation about technology's power and control. Ambiguity creates panic. Ambiguity represents those dystopian headlines that we see in the papers and online all too often. But critical technology discourse can provide hope, aspirations, solutions, and crucially, digital literacy for ourselves and our visitors and audiences. The creative and cultural industries can provide a valuable platform for critical technology discourse. They can be brave, curious advocates for art that asks questions and challenges power. So my challenge to you today then, don't just use AI. Ask questions, be curious, imagine a new world, commission those that look at this technology differently. Listen to and platform diverse stakeholders. Fund artists, not tech companies. Ultimately, artists can save us. Thank you.
You have been listening to the podcast of ENCATC, the European Network on Cultural Management and Policy. To learn more about us, our activities, and how to become a member, visit encact.org.